My name is Rachel Carter, and I am 31 years old. For 6 years, I quietly sent my parents $2,500 every month. They never asked where it came from, never thanked me, never even suspected it was me. They simply told everyone that my brother, Jonathan, the golden child with the stethoscope around his neck, was the generous one. The truth was that I was the one carrying them, while they were busy dismissing me as the ordinary sibling, the one who chose numbers over saving lives. I never said anything. Every family gathering I endured the same pattern. My parents bragged about Jonathan's new research, his latest promotion, his perfect suits and polished reputation. I sat at the edge of the table, smiling, pretending not to care. They looked at me with polite pity when I mentioned work. An accountant, that was all I was to them. They never asked what kind of accountant, never wanted to know about the long hours or the board meetings where I held the power to decide the future of entire organizations. The night of Jonathan's celebration, everything boiled over. Riverside Memorial Hospital had just promoted him to department chief, the youngest in their history. The ballroom was dressed like a scene from a movie. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, tables covered in linen as white as snow stretched across the room, and expensive orchids bloomed in the center of each table. 200 guests filled the hall, laughing and clinking glasses, congratulating Jonathan as if he had single-handedly saved the world. My mother glowed in her new suit Jonathan had bought her. My father kept his proud hand on her back, and they never once looked my way after the obligatory greeting at the entrance. They placed me at a back table near the service doors. The people around me were distant relatives and plus ones who barely remembered each other's names. I wore a simple black dress, neat but understated, and I felt like a shadow in a room of dazzling lights. When my aunt squeezed past me, asking for a better angle to photograph Jonathan at the podium, I moved without a word. That was my role, to move aside, to be invisible. As Jonathan walked up to the stage in his tailored suit, applause echoed like thunder. He tapped the microphone and smiled, every inch the flawless surgeon. A banner behind him screamed his excellence in bold gold letters. My parents' faces shone with pride brighter than the chandeliers. Everyone leaned forward, eyes locked on him, while I sat in the back staring at the man who had stolen not just my money but my place in the family. My phone buzzed under the table. A message from my assistant reminding me of the board meeting scheduled the next morning, where my signature alone would determine whether $600,000 in funding reached a certain hospital program. I tucked the phone away. No one in that room knew the irony yet. They were watching a man praised for his ability to provide, unaware that the quiet woman in the corner was the one holding the key to his entire future. Jonathan began his speech, thanking the board, the hospital, and of course, our parents. He spoke of sacrifice and family values, his voice polished and confident. He told them family was everything to him. I almost laughed at the cruelty of that statement. Family had been everything to me too, until I learned that love without recognition turns into chains. I could feel the familiar sting rising in my chest, the same sting I had felt when my father once told me I was wasting my potential, the same sting when my mother brushed off my achievements with a polite nod before announcing Jonathan's latest award, the same sting when my cousins asked me if it was difficult living in my brother's shadow. They never knew I was the one who had paid off the mortgage, who had covered medical bills, who had kept the family afloat with money I could have used to buy a home or pursue another degree. And yet as I sat there, I felt something shift inside me. Not rage, not bitterness, clarity. This was the night they would finally see me, whether they wanted to or not. When I was a teenager, the path ahead of me seemed as wide open as the sky. Teachers told me I could be anything. My grades were high, my scholarship offers generous, and my parents believed the answer was obvious. They wanted another doctor in the family. They imagined me in a white coat standing next to Jonathan, 2 children saving lives, making them proud. But I did not want the white coat. I wanted numbers. I wanted balance sheets, strategy, the invisible patterns hidden in ledgers that told the story of every business. The night I told them, my father's eyes dimmed. Accounting, he repeated, as if the word itself was sour. My mother shook her head. But Rachel, with your grades you could walk into any medical school. I said I did not want medical school. I wanted numbers. My father's voice cut like a blade. Enjoyment does not pay bills. Look at Jonathan. He is building something meaningful. What does accounting offer? Sitting behind a desk while real people change the world? From that day forward, I was no longer the child they bragged about. I graduated top of my class, but there was no party. I landed a position at one of the largest firms in the country, but their voices were quiet when I shared the news. When Jonathan published a paper, when he received another award, when he bought his first new car, they shouted his glory to the heavens. When I earned my first promotion, my mother smiled and said that was nice before turning to tell the neighbors about Jonathan's new surgery technique. I stopped competing for their affection, at least outwardly. Inside, the hunger to be seen never left. 6 years ago, during one of our short phone calls, my mother let slip that they were struggling with the mortgage since my father's retirement. Their voices sounded tired, uncertain, frightened of losing the house they had lived in for decades. I did not hesitate. I set up automatic transfers, $2,500 a month, sent directly into their joint account. I never mentioned it again. I never asked for thanks. It was easier to imagine that maybe, in some way, they would quietly recognize it. Maybe they would see me, but they did not. At family dinners, my mother gushed about Jonathan's generosity. Jonathan paid for the kitchen renovation. Jonathan covered your father's medical bills. Jonathan even sent us on a vacation. I would sit silently, chewing slowly, as everyone toasted to the son who provided. Once my father raised his glass and said, "At least we have one child who understands the meaning of family." The others laughed and clapped, and I lifted my glass as if I agreed. Inside, my chest burned with shame and rage. I could have corrected them. I could have told the truth, but I told myself that love was not supposed to demand credit. I kept sending the money, month after month. 72 months passed. That is $180,000. Money that could have been my down payment on a house. Money that could have sent me to graduate school. Money that could have bought freedom from the modest apartment I rented and the 10-year-old car I drove. Instead, I handed it over in silence, hoping one day they would see me not as the disappointment but as the daughter who stood steady when they needed her most. The worst part was not the money. It was how easily my parents gave Jonathan the credit. They did not ask questions because they did not want to. They were comfortable believing the story where he was the savior and I was the afterthought. At holidays, cousins leaned over their plates of roast and asked if it was difficult being Jonathan's sister. "He is just so accomplished," they said. "But we all have our roles to play, right? He saves lives, you do taxes." The table laughed. I laughed with them, though something inside me cracked. That was the night I stopped trying to earn their love. It was also the night I began to plan. I would not storm into their living room with bank statements. I would not scream for recognition. I would wait. I would choose a moment where the truth could not be ignored, where my brother's shadow could not hide me anymore. My therapy sessions became my anchor during those years. My therapist asked me once, "Rachel, what would happen if you just told them?" I told her they would never believe me. Jonathan had already claimed the role of provider, and I was the quiet one who only played with numbers. But deep down, I knew the day would come when the weight of silence would become heavier than the risk of truth. When the invitation to Jonathan's promotion banquet arrived, printed in gold and cream, I held it in my hands for a long time. The words celebrating his leadership, his vision, his excellence, glared up at me. I knew the moment had arrived. The ballroom glowed with excess, every corner filled with laughter and clinking glasses. My brother Jonathan stood tall in his tailored navy suit, the picture of charm and accomplishment. He moved through the crowd as though the night had been built for him alone. I sat at the back, listening to the steady stream of praise that followed him like a second shadow. Every compliment stung, not because he had not earned some of them, but because they were built on the silent sacrifices I had made, while being dismissed as nothing. The slideshow began. Photo after photo appeared on the enormous screen above the stage. Jonathan in his white coat on the first day of residency, Jonathan holding a framed certificate, Jonathan shaking hands with senior physicians, Jonathan standing beside our parents with a smile that stretched as wide as his ambition. 40 photographs in total, every one a monument to his journey. I was not in a single one, not at his graduation, not at family holidays, not even in the corner of a candid shot. I remembered taking some of those pictures myself, holding the camera so he could shine without interruption. When the family portrait appeared, Jonathan between our parents in front of the fireplace, I remembered the moment vividly. I had been asked to step aside and press the button because Jonathan should be in the picture. That memory sank into me like a stone. The applause filled the air as my mother took the microphone, her voice trembling with pride. She called Jonathan their rock, their provider, their pride and joy. She mentioned me with a fleeting gesture, a polite afterthought. "Rachel does accounting," she said, and the audience laughed softly, as though being an accountant was a punchline. My cheeks warmed, but my voice stayed trapped inside. I stared at the screen as if my silence could keep me from shattering. My phone buzzed again, messages stacked on the screen, my assistant asking for confirmation. The board reminding me that tomorrow's meeting in Tokyo required my final signature on a major funding decision. The institution waiting for that money was none other than Riverside Memorial Hospital, the same hospital that had just raised Jonathan onto its pedestal. He had spoken with confidence at our last family dinner, promising the program's success because he had secured private funding. His voice was filled with certainty, but I knew the truth. The certainty came from me, even if he never said it aloud. The irony twisted in my chest. I held the key to the very grant that gave Jonathan his aura of power. The hospital believed in him because they believed the money was secured. What they did not know was that the so-called disappointment in the back of the room was the one with the final say. Jonathan's speech continued. He raised his hands, thanking everyone, promising scholarships for underprivileged medical students, pledging to transform lives. My mother's eyes shone with tears, my father's shoulders swelled with pride. Around me, whispers of admiration filled the room. He was the savior. He was the man who sacrificed, who gave, who carried. But I knew the reality. While he wore expensive suits and drove a gleaming car, my transfers were disappearing into accounts he controlled. My money had bought their kitchen renovation, their medical bills, their mortgage freedom. My money had kept him shining, while I cut corners in silence. The tension inside me built with every word he spoke. His promises of generosity, his declarations of sacrifice, the applause that erupted after every phrase. The air was heavy with admiration, and I was choking on it. I could feel my hands trembling under the table, my chest tight, my vision sharpened as though the moment was pressing down on me from every side. Then I saw him glance toward the board members, his voice rich with pride. He promised them the funding was secured for the next 5 years. He promised them stability, legacy, transformation. The applause swelled once more, louder than ever. That was the moment I knew. The weight of silence had reached its end. I looked around the room, 200 faces lit with belief. My parents smiling wider than I had ever seen. Jonathan glowing in the light of his own speech. My phone buzzed again, the board asking for confirmation, the clock ticking closer to their deadline. The irony of it all struck me in a wave. Jonathan stood there declaring that he was the one who ensured the future of the hospital, while I was the only person who could make or break his promise. He had built his throne on my hidden labor, and tonight the truth pressed harder than it ever had before. I pressed my palms against the table, steadying myself. My heart pounded, my breath sharp, but clarity washed over me. This was no longer just about me. This was about truth, about refusing to be erased, about no longer carrying the silence that had smothered me for too long. The moment froze in my mind, a single frame of my life that would never fade. My brother Jonathan on stage, his face lifted toward the audience as if he had been born to bask in their applause. My parents at the front, clapping until their hands reddened. 200 guests standing to honor him, the chandeliers trembling with their cheers. I rose from my chair at the back, the noise crashing against me like waves, and for the first time in years I did not shrink into myself. I walked forward, each step steady, heels clicking against the marble floor. A hush rippled through the room as heads turned. Jonathan's smile faltered. "May I speak?" My voice was not loud, but it cut through the air like a blade. The master of ceremonies, startled, glanced at Jonathan, who gave a stiff nod. The microphone passed into my hand, cool and heavy, as the audience shifted uneasily in their seats. "My name is Rachel Carter," I began, my voice steady though my chest burned. "I am Jonathan's sister. Some of you may not know much about me because tonight, as in every family gathering, my existence has been reduced to a polite afterthought. But there is something you should know before we continue celebrating." A murmur rose from the crowd. I reached into my clutch and drew out a neat folder, a stack of papers I had carried for months, waiting for the right moment. For 6 years, every month without fail, I transferred $2,500 into my parents' account. That adds up to $180,000. This money was never mentioned at family dinners, never credited to me. In fact, every time, my brother was praised as the provider. The truth is simple. I was the provider. Gasps filled the room. My mother's hands flew to her mouth. My father shook his head in disbelief. Jonathan's eyes flashed with anger, not shame but fury at being exposed. You want proof? I held up the folder. Here are the receipts. Every transfer, every date, every amount, my name, my accounts. Not his. I opened the folder and handed copies to a few board members in the front row, executives whose expressions shifted from confusion to shock as they scanned the pages. Jonathan stepped forward, voice sharp. Rachel, this is not the time. No, Jonathan, I answered, my voice steady. It is exactly the time, because while you stand here promising to secure the future of Riverside Memorial Hospital, you are building that promise on a lie. You told these people you had secured funding for years to come. You boasted of stability and legacy. The truth is that the money you claim as your triumph is hanging on my approval, my decision, and my name. The silence that followed was heavier than any applause. My parents' eyes darted between us, torn between love and disbelief. The audience leaned forward, hungry for more, unable to look away. I continued. I am the chief financial officer of a Fortune 500 corporation. I manage budgets that dwarf this hospital's entire yearly revenue. I was asked to approve a grant of $600,000 to Riverside Memorial Hospital. A grant Jonathan assured you was already secured. The truth is that the decision has not been finalized. The truth is that it depends on me. The room erupted in whispers, tension sharp enough to cut glass. Jonathan's face drained of color. He tried to laugh, brushing it off as sibling rivalry. She is exaggerating. She is jealous. She always has been. I raised my hand, silencing the crowd. Do you think I would come here, in front of 200 people, executives, donors, and family, to spin jealousy? No. I am here because silence has cost me too much. I am here because respect must be earned, not stolen. A woman in the audience asked softly, "Is this true?" Her voice carried in the stillness. One of the board members, still holding the copies I had handed him, rose from his seat. His voice was firm. The documents are authentic. Her name is on every transfer. Her position is exactly as she says. The ballroom shifted, the admiration that had wrapped itself around Jonathan unraveling before my eyes. My mother whispered Jonathan's name, pleading, but his mouth opened and closed with no defense. I took a breath. For years, I believed love was enough, that giving without recognition was noble, that silence was strength. But tonight, I see clearly. Love without respect is not love, it is obligation. And I am done being obligated. The weight lifted from my chest as I placed the microphone back on its stand. The room buzzed with shock, confusion, disbelief. My parents sat frozen, my father's jaw tight, my mother's eyes wet. Jonathan stood pale and trembling, his carefully crafted image collapsing around him. The master of ceremonies fumbled, unsure how to continue, but the night had already shifted. The truth was no longer mine alone to carry. It belonged to every person in that room who had witnessed it. I turned from the stage and walked back to my table, my spine straight, my steps firm. For the first time in years, I felt visible. Jonathan's composure cracked the moment I set the microphone down. His practiced smile slipped away, replaced by a twitch at the corner of his mouth. He grabbed the microphone from the stand with a force that startled even the master of ceremonies. "She's lying," he said, his voice loud and unsteady. "Rachel has always been bitter. She could not handle being in my shadow. This is her attempt to humiliate me on my night." The guests shifted in their seats, glancing between him and the papers still being passed from hand to hand. The board members studied the documents, frowns deepening as they whispered to one another. My mother stood, clutching her pearls, her voice desperate. "Jonathan, please, tell them this isn't true." "It isn't," Jonathan snapped, but the tone was all wrong. It was sharp, defensive, lacking the smooth confidence he usually wielded so easily. His eyes darted across the room, seeking approval. But the admiration that had once followed him so effortlessly had begun to dissolve. One of the hospital's senior executives rose from his chair. "We'll need to review these documents formally, Jonathan. If your sister's claims are accurate, then there is a serious issue with the statements you provided to our board." Jonathan's face reddened. "This is ridiculous. Do you really think she has the kind of influence she's pretending to? She's an accountant. She moves numbers around. I save lives." I stood again, my voice calm but cutting. "I do not move numbers around. I control them. I sign off on multi-million-dollar allocations that decide whether hospitals like yours thrive or collapse. That is the truth Jonathan hoped you would never hear. The audience gasped. A ripple of disbelief moved through the room, but disbelief was not denial. It was the sound of illusions breaking apart. Jonathan tried to laugh, but the sound came out hollow. "You've always envied me," he said, his voice dropping lower now, almost a hiss. "You hated that they loved me more, that I was the one who mattered. This is nothing but revenge." I looked at him, steady and unflinching. "If you believe this is revenge, then you still do not understand. This is truth, and truth does not care about your reputation." A silence followed. The weight of it pressed on everyone in the room. My parents remained motionless, trapped between loyalty to the son they had worshipped and the daughter they had ignored. I saw the pain flicker in my mother's eyes, but she said nothing. My father's jaw tightened. He too stayed silent. It was the board members who finally shattered the stillness. One of them, a tall man with silver hair, stood and addressed Jonathan directly. "Your application for the grant made specific claims regarding financial backing that, according to these records, were misleading at best. You assured us funds were secured when they were not. That alone warrants immediate investigation." Jonathan's shoulders sagged. His arrogance faltered. He stammered, I didn't know. She must have." He stopped himself, realizing the trap. If he admitted he knew nothing, then he had lied to them. If he admitted he did know, then he had stolen credit. Either way, the mask had shattered. The room murmured again, the tide turning against him. Guests who had once lined up to shake his hand now looked away, whispering to each other. The glow of admiration dimmed, replaced with suspicion and pity. I took no pleasure in watching him crumble, only a deep, steady relief. The burden of silence had been heavier than any anger I carried. Now it was gone. But Jonathan was not finished. He turned to me, his voice breaking, his words laced with desperation. "Why would you do this, Rachel? We're family. Family protects each other." I met his eyes, calm and unwavering. "Family protects each other, yes, but they also tell the truth. And you built your throne on my silence. That ends tonight." My mother finally spoke, her voice shaking. "Rachel, please, not like this. You've made your point. Let's go home and talk about it." I shook my head. "We've been talking about it for years, only no one wanted to hear. Tonight is not about home. Tonight is about truth, and truth cannot be packed away quietly anymore." Jonathan's last attempt to salvage his dignity collapsed when another executive spoke. "Jonathan, until this is resolved, we will have to suspend your leadership position at the hospital, effective immediately." Gasps rippled through the audience. My father rose, his face red with fury, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You've destroyed your own brother. Are you proud?" I looked at him, my voice soft but firm. "I did not destroy him. His lies did. I simply refused to carry them any longer." Jonathan sank back into his chair, pale and broken. The golden child had fallen, not with a bang, but with a silence that spread across the room like smoke. The applause that had once filled the air was gone. In its place, only the weight of reality remained. The banquet ended in fragments. Guests slipped out in silence, their heels and shoes tapping against marble as though they were escaping a fire. The chandeliers still gleamed, but the room felt darker, stripped of its shine. My parents stood together near the stage, their faces tight with grief, as though my words had killed something precious. Jonathan remained seated, his glass untouched, his gaze fixed on the tablecloth. I walked out into the night air, cool against my flushed skin. For the first time in years, I felt lighter, yet the weight of what came next pressed against me. Family ties do not dissolve in one evening. Love does not vanish even when poisoned by lies. I still loved them, but I loved myself enough now to draw a line. The following week, the hospital board called me directly. Their tone was careful, respectful. They asked whether I would still approve the grant despite what had surfaced. I told them the truth. I would not. The money would not vanish, though. I redirected the entire $600,000 into a foundation under my name. Its purpose was clear: scholarships for students from overlooked backgrounds who wanted to study finance, accounting, or economics. Fields that rarely drew glory but built the backbone of every institution. When I signed the paperwork, I felt the final chain break. For years, my labor had been invisible, swallowed by my brother's image. Now my work would lift up people like me, those underestimated, dismissed, erased. My parents visited me soon after. They did not arrive with warmth. My father's voice carried anger, my mother's carried pleading. "You humiliated us," my father said, pacing my apartment. "You humiliated your brother in front of everyone." "I told the truth," I said quietly. "If the truth humiliates you, that is not my fault." My mother reached for my hand. "We just want the family whole again. Can't you forgive him?" He was under pressure. I pulled my hand back gently. "I can forgive, but forgiveness does not mean silence. Forgiveness does not erase boundaries. If this family wants healing, it starts with respect. It starts with acknowledging what I did, not what you wish Jonathan had done." They exchanged glances. My father's face hardened, unwilling to yield. My mother's eyes brimmed with tears. "We love you," she whispered, as though the words could fix everything. "Love without respect is just obligation," I replied, the words firm. "If you want me in this family, you have to see me, truly see me." The conversation ended without resolution. They left with heavy steps, carrying the weight of a reality they did not want to face. Jonathan called me once, weeks later. His voice was strained, raw. "You've ruined me," he said. "The board suspended me. My reputation is in shreds. You could have handled this privately." I closed my eyes. "I gave you 6 years of privacy, 6 years of silence. You built your empire on it. You cannot demand more." He cursed under his breath. "You think you're better than me now?" "No," I said softly. "I know I am not better. I am simply free." I ended the call. He did not call again. Months passed. News spread that Jonathan was facing personal debt and investigations into his handling of funds. His marriage cracked under the strain. My parents continued to hover between denial and sorrow, unable to accept the fall of the son they had worshipped, yet unable to deny the daughter who stood firm before them. Meanwhile, the Carter Foundation grew. I visited community colleges and high schools, speaking with students who thought they had no future beyond surviving. Their eyes lit when I told them that their work, though unseen, mattered, that finance and accounting could change lives, that they could change lives. Every scholarship awarded was a reminder. The money I once gave in silence was now a voice echoing louder than I ever imagined. For the first time, I did not feel invisible. I felt whole. 1 year later, I stood at the front of a banquet hall that looked nothing like the grand ballroom where my brother had once been crowned the family hero. This hall was modest, decorated with care rather than excess. Instead of crystal chandeliers, strands of soft lights hung overhead. Instead of orchids imported from overseas, there were fresh wildflowers arranged by volunteers. Instead of 200 guests dressed in gowns and tuxedos, there were students in borrowed suits, proud parents in their best Sunday clothes, and community leaders who had fought their way up from the same struggles these young people were now facing. The Carter Foundation's first annual scholarship gala was underway. Dozens of students sat at the front tables, their faces glowing with pride as their names were called and applause filled the room. Some were the first in their families to go to college. Others had been told their dreams were too small, or that their worth lay only in how quiet they could remain. As I looked at them, I saw pieces of myself in every face. When it was my turn to speak, I took the stage without fear. My voice carried through the hall, calm and clear. 1 year ago, I stood in a different room, in a different light, surrounded by people who believed success belonged only to those who shine the brightest. That night, I realized something important. Visibility does not come from waiting for others to see you. It comes from choosing to step into the light, even when your voice trembles. Tonight, we are stepping into the light together. No. The applause was warm, not thunderous like the false praise I had once witnessed, but real, steady, and filled with heart. My parents were there too. They sat near the back, quieter than I remembered, but they had come. Therapy had softened them in small ways. My mother had learned to listen more. My father had spoken the words, "I'm sorry," for the first time, though it was only once, and only in private. Our relationship was not healed, not entirely, but it was no longer invisible. Progress, not perfection. Jonathan was not there. He had entered rehabilitation months earlier after his debts and choices caught up with him. For the first time, he faced the truth without the cushion of applause. I did not hate him for it. I wished him recovery, not revenge. His path was his own now. Mine was here, among these students. I introduced the first scholarship recipient, a young woman named Lila, whose voice quivered as she spoke about her dream of becoming an auditor. People laugh when I say it, she admitted at the podium. But I want to make sure money is used honestly. I want to be the one who notices when something isn't right. Her words struck me like an echo of my own life. I clapped until my hands stung, tears in my eyes. As the evening continued, story after story unfolded. A boy whose parents cleaned offices at night, now set to study finance at a state university. A single mother in her 30s, returning to school to finally earn her degree. Each voice carried the weight of invisibility, and each one lifted higher as the audience applauded. This was legacy, not the shallow glory of titles or staged photographs, but the kind of legacy that ripples outward, touching lives beyond your own. When the gala drew to a close, I returned to the stage one last time. The room quieted, expectant. "A year ago," I said, "I thought my story was about proving myself to the people who had overlooked me. But tonight, I understand. My story is not about revenge. It is about visibility, dignity, and choosing to honor the value in ourselves even when others refuse to. Every student here is proof that invisibility can be transformed into strength. And if you carry nothing else from tonight, carry this. Your worth is not decided by applause. It is decided by your courage to stand, even when no one is watching." The hall erupted in applause. This time, I did not shrink. I let the sound wash over me, not as proof that I mattered, but as celebration of what we were building together. I stepped down from the stage and walked among the tables, shaking hands, listening to stories, hugging parents who cried with gratitude. The night ended not with champagne and chandeliers, but with promises, laughter, and hope that filled the air long after the lights dimmed. As I left the hall, I looked up at the night sky. It was clear and full of stars, each one small but burning fiercely. For the first time in my life, I no longer felt like a shadow. I was not the overlooked sibling. I was not the disappointment. I was Rachel Carter, and I was finally seen.